Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin. And we're going to be talking about traditional markets as well. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. This video is brought to you by the number 5. Let's go ahead and jump in. So Bitcoin right now is trading at a very modest $47,845. And at the current time, we are in fact sitting above the 20-week moving average. We are also above the 21-week EMA. And we have had a test of both the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, albeit they were only wicks at this point. And it begs the question, will Bitcoin ultimately test them on the weekly time frame, or is the 8-week moving average the shorter term moving average, which is what ultimately held as support during the last leg up multiple times, and then once we broke it, we had to go into a lull. Is the 8-week going to provide support? Because if it does, then we might not get a test of the 20-week SMA. Now, my preference, if I'm being completely honest, is to get a long test of the 20-week moving average. But we also have to remember that doesn't have to occur now anyways. I mean, it could occur a month from now or 2 months from now, and the valuation of the 20-week SMA could be a lot higher by then, for all we know. Ideally speaking, I would like to see it tested. However, we do not live in an ideal world, and sometimes you just take what you get, okay? So if you're betting on anything specific to happen, just remember the short-term moves in the market are very difficult to predict. Now, I want to talk about traditional markets, okay? Because there have been times in the past where traditional markets can at least temporarily cause some issues with Bitcoin in the short term. Now, it doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't recover, because a lot of times the traditional markets will recover just as quickly as they had a correction themselves. But I do want to bring it up because the Dow Jones is actually testing its own bull market support band. And we've tested it in the past, right? We tested it July 19th. Okay, we tested it July 19th. We also tested it June 14th. And you can see that both of these ultimately held the bull market support band. The only time we fell below the 20-week SMA in recent times was back in October of 2020, but then we were right back above it the next week. The danger could come if we end up having, say, weekly candles closing below over here, because that would probably not be great for Bitcoin in the short term. Now, even if that happens, my contention is that trying to predict 40% drops in the stock market is a very foolish thing to do. Why? Because most of the time you're going to be wrong, because the stock market does just generally trend up with time, as we see. I mean, of course, macro conditions might change that one day, but for the last several decades, the stock market just generally trends up with time. And there's always going to be bears calling for 40% pullbacks, and occasionally they'll get them, right? They'll happen every once in a while, but they're very few and far between, and so I would not count on that. So even if we were to get a dip down some, I would not think that it would be sustained for very long, okay? I mean, now it's no surprise that traditional markets are continuing to be this elevated and whatnot, given the current sentiment going around. But I would say, a lot of people are calling for a massive bear market for traditional markets. But again, if you think about it, they were also calling for that back in March 2020. Have we all forgotten about all the calls people made calling for a Great Depression or another major recession? These things happened back last year. And at the time, we actually have a risk metric for the stock market, and it was 0.29. It was incredibly low. You hardly ever see it at those valuations, at those risk levels. And at the time, I remember making a video on the channel and saying back in March of 2020, that's the time. That's the time to load up. It is as scary as it is, and it could keep dropping for a little while, but that's the time to load up when the risk metric is low. And when it's high, it's okay to take profits if you want. Right? It's okay to skim profits off the top if you need it for something. But again, the stock market is a completely different game than crypto. A lot of times with the stock market, you just sort of put it in there and then you let it sit and you just kind of forget about it for a long time. A lot of people do that with crypto too, but the stock market, A lot of people have been doing that for years and leaving it for 40 years and whatnot and just buying index funds. So the reason why I talk about traditional markets today is because with the weekly open that we have coming up, in just over a day or so, it might be worth watching traditional markets, okay? Because if we fall below, it could at least temporarily halt what's going on with Bitcoin, okay? If we bounce back up, then, there's a decent chance the party keeps going on. If we go look at the dollar, the dollar has been actually doing very, very well recently, okay? And you can see that last week the dollar went up 0.65%, a week after it went up 0.57%. These are pretty big moves for the dollar, and you can see that we're above the bull market support band and we're above the 50-week SMA, which have historically been some level of resistance, okay? But in recent times, we're actually above. Okay, we're actually above it rather than holding either the 20-week as resistance or the 50-week as resistance. So historically, when the dollar is moving up, traditional markets tend to not do so well. So what you should be looking for, and if you don't have them on your watch list because you don't really think about these things, I would say you should add them because they can give you some insight. Add the dollar, add DXY, the US dollar currency index. If you see it continuing to rally in the short term, it will likely make it difficult for Bitcoin to immediately put in new all-time highs. But alternatively, if instead the dollar gets rejected back down, this is great for Bitcoin. This is great for traditional markets. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind. I would also make sure to add the Dow Jones to your watch list as well. If you look at the S&P 500 SPY, if you look at this one, it's really interesting. Just look at this chart. It's just going, straight up, right? It's going straight up. You wonder why the meme of up only for stocks exists is because, for a while it's seemingly all it does. We have just come off, though, 2 weeks of negative 0.9% and negative 1.69%. So we have had a couple of red weeks. We've seen this over the last few years. So far, it has not led to another major sell-off. Now, could we get a 10 to 15% sell-off? Sure, right? I don't think these things are out of the question. A 10% sell-off would take us down here. Of course, these are always possible, but I see people calling for, say, 40% and 50% pullbacks right now, and I would contend that it's highly unlikely that we see a 40 to 50% pullback in the stock market in the short term. Okay, I would contend that is highly unlikely in the short term. So, going back to Bitcoin, the key thing to watch for as we come into the weekly close tomorrow is, can it hold the 8-week as support? Because if it does, then that means we have another week of potentially seeing, hey, are we going to repeat this leg that started in, say, October of 2020 and lasted until April of 2021? Are we about to start another leg to that journey, or are we going to come back down and test the 20-week for a while longer before getting the momentum we might need to continue higher? So there's a lot of things going on here in the next few days. Make sure you guys pay attention, not only to Bitcoin, but also traditional markets as well. Now, the reason this show is brought to you by the number 5 is because it's come to my attention that a lot of you have taken exception to the way that I write the number 5. And I've never really thought about it before, but I write 5s starting from the bottom, okay, rather than starting from the top. And let me show you what I mean. When I write a 5, I start from here, and I do it like that. And apparently, this has really freaked some people out. They're saying that, okay, you can't trust Ben anymore if he's writing a 5 like this. Some said it gave him cancer just watching me write a 5 like this. It's funny, because I never really thought about it before. And then when I went through all the numbers, I was like, well, I essentially start every other number from the top, and then I was thinking, well, for some reason, I start 5s at the bottom. I don't really understand why, but I'm probably not going to change that. That's just always how I've written them. I don't know why. I just like to do like this, come down, and then back up and over. Now, it comes to my attention, because I did a Twitter poll on what is the correct way to do it, that 90% of people actually start from the top and then come down and then over, which I think makes sense. I mean, every other number I write starting from the top, it's questionable why I've decided to write the 5 starting from the bottom. So I would argue that I could understand at least why someone would do this. What I don't understand is that some people tell me the correct way to write a 5 is to start like this and come over and then come back up and go across. And to me, this just seems extremely inefficient. Did someone just sit down and decide, okay, what's the most inefficient way we could write a 5? If you start from the bottom, you never have to lift your pen, right, or the mouse. If you start from the top, you never have to lift it. If you do this, you have to lift it, and it makes absolutely no sense to me. So anyways, I wanted to make a few comments on it because apparently in the last video on Bitcoin, I was writing some 5s, and a lot of people had adverse reactions to it. So yes, I write 5s from the bottom, and I will probably continue to do so. I don't know, that's just how I've always done it. Anyways, this week's episode is brought to you by the number 5. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you check out the premium list, which you can find a link to in the description below. Subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.